believe that it's been 20 years since this highway accident? I don't know about you, but I can still feel it in my bones whenever getting onto a freeway. And driving behind a logging truck? Forget about it. But there's so much more to this movie than just a phenomenal car crash at its forefront. There's the entertaining characters like Rory, who absolutely steals the show.
And if I die, would you throw down my drugs and my paraphernalia and my porno?
And the ones that you want to slap, like lottery winner Evan Lewis. Whatever it is, it culminates in one awesome ride. No pun intended. So today, we're going to tell you what the f happened to Final Destination 2. The first Final Destination was a relative hit when it released in 2000. The plane crash was a thing of nightmares and came to us from James Wong, Glenn Morgan, and Jeffrey Reddick. Originally planned as an X-Files episode, this Death Has a Vendetta film showed a litany of possibilities for any sequel. I mean, hell, death can come for you in so many ways. But unfortunately, James Wong and Glenn Morgan were unable to return as they had already signed on to the Jet Li action film The One. So instead, Jeffrey Reddick set out to come up with a story idea for the sequel. Despite only having directed Homeward Bound 2: Lost in San Francisco, David R. Ellis was hired as a director. Having worked as a second unit director for decades, Ellis has more of an action flair than one for horror. Because of this, the movie has a little more kinetic energy than the original, and feels considerably more like popcorn fun. J. Mackie Gruber and Eric Bress were brought in to write a script that they'd conceived with Reddick. In one of the more controversial moments of the entire franchise, the writers make the decision to kill off Devon Sawa's Alex Browning character from the first film. In and of itself, this isn't a terrible thing, as it's happened in horror movies before. But the biggest sin committed here is that Alex is killed off-screen. So after spending an entire film following this kid as he narrowly escapes death, we don't even get to see when he's finally offed. Rumors swirled for years that Sawa didn't return due to a contract dispute with the studio, and that they were lowballing him to return. However, series producer Craig Perry has denied this, saying that it was done for narrative reasons. Maybe it's somewhere in the middle. The writers did, however, bring back Ali Larter's Clear Rivers character, placing her in a mental institution where she's hiding away from death. Given the arc her character goes on in the first film, this feels like a bit of a step back for her. For the lead, they decided to go the final girl route and cast AJ Cook as Kimberly Corman. Cook was relatively unknown at the time, but you may recognize her nowadays because she's been on that CBS show Criminal Minds for over 300 episodes. So I think she's doing pretty well for herself. Funnily enough, Cook is actually a natural blonde. Worried that audiences would have trouble distinguishing between the two blondes on screen, Cook was asked to dye her hair brown. Ah, the early 2000s. A time where you couldn't have two blondes in your movie out of fear of confusion. Good times. And it's even funnier when you realize that Ali Larter's character was already brown-haired in the first film. Just keep her as a brown-haired girl.
This girl is really freaked out. In fact, all of them are scared, as you can imagine.
Scared? These people are the luckiest sons of bitches on the planet.
Michael Landis, Terrence C. Carson, Keegan Connor Tracy, and Jonathan Cherry round out the rest of the cast of survivors. Finally, Tony Todd returned to his role as the ominous morgue technician. The story was a simple one. Kimberly and her friends are off on a weekend getaway, but she has a vision of a gnarly car crash. She's thankfully able to stop it and save several people, but unfortunately her friends aren't so lucky. Convinced that death will come for them, they all team up to try and stop it. Thankfully, they have the events of the previous film to help convince the characters quickly that yes, this is really happening. It's pretty by the numbers, but the characters are really fun, and they introduce a whole concept of death trying to rectify some past mistakes. See, each of these people were present during events in the first film, and had their own little mini avoiding death moment.
It didn't just change our lives. It affected everyone and everything we've come into contact with since.
So death is trying to make up for it. Yeah, don't think too hard on the logistics for this one, because then you're going to be questioning, how was death able to get all of these people on this on-ramp? But again, you don't want to think too hard on this. With a budget of $26 million, filming for Final Destination 2 took place on Vancouver Island and surrounding areas. So if there's times that you think this looks like a CW show, that's why. The notorious highway scene was filmed on the British Columbia Highway 19, where they shut down sections for filming. Surprisingly, most of the elements in the crash are practical. While there are CGI enhancements, mostly with fire, the crashes are all very real, which is why it's so impactful 20 years later. In fact, one of the largest elements of CGI in this crash were the logs falling off the truck, as the production learned quite quickly that real logs only bounce about an inch off the ground even when they're dropped from large heights. So CGI was really the only way to do it. Even getting away from the opening highway scene, the deaths in Final Destination 2 are some of the best of the entire series. From the entire apartment fire sequence to this domino effect after the accident, there's so many that will stick with you long after the credits roll. Life casts were done on all of the actors, which allows for many practical moments that likely would have just been entirely CGI these days. Even the scene with Tim getting completely smashed by a pane of glass was done practically. And to think, this character was originally going to be just 9 years old. Thankfully, New Line execs pushed back on the idea of such a small child being harmed so brutally. Seems like a good idea, because the death is disturbing enough as it is. One of the film's bigger stunts involved Cook and Landis being submerged underwater while in an ambulance. The actors actually performed the stunt themselves, with Cook having to overcome an intense fear of being trapped underwater. They made it through though, and the scene went off without a hitch. There's also a pretty funny ending tag where it's revealed that Brian Gibbons, the boy that Rory saved from getting hit by the truck earlier, is now on Death's list, and Death needs to do a little bit of cleanup. And fans of Shameless may recognize little Brian.
It was like I was there. I knew something bad was gonna happen even before it did. It just felt wrong, just like...
Just like what?
You guys all heard about Flight 180, right? The kid who got off the plane. What happened a year ago today?
Final Destination 2 released in the United States on January 31st, 2003, and earned over $16 million on its opening weekend. The film ended its worldwide tally at over 90 million. While this would be the lowest total of the entire franchise, this was still a massive hit. Like many horror films, critics weren't quite a fan, earning a 48% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. The consensus was that this sequel is little more than an excuse to stage elaborate, gory scenes of characters getting killed off. Yes, you are right, critics, and they are glorious. The franchise was healthy enough to spawn 3 more sequels, with a 6th film announced from Jeffrey Reddick. Whether that follows the more subdued approach of the original, or the more bombastic approach that Ellis took with the first sequel, audiences are clearly chomping at the bit for more entries. Any good movie will leave an impression on you, and spring up in moments that you wouldn't expect it to. But with Final Destination 2, anytime I get on a highway, I know that the visual image of the crash is going to enter my head, and I'm going to be hoping like hell for no log trucks.
Dead, yet still.